This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Friday, June 5th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of coronavirus, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on and appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Thousands of people mourned George Floyd across the United States on Thursday, and hundreds more gathered for a memorial service in Minneapolis honoring him as U.S. lawmakers, regardless of political party, are openly condemning the police use of force that led to Floyd's death. VOA's Jesusamen Ani has more.
At the first in a series of memorial services before George Floyd is laid to rest, Amen. Hundreds of mourners gathered in Minneapolis to pay their respects Thursday.
The Lord is my light and my salvation.
While in Washington, Senate Democrats held an 8-minute, 46-second long moment of silence, remembering each second Floyd was pinned underneath police officer Derek Chauvin's knee.
We gather here in solemn reverence to not just mark his tragic death, but to give honor to his life.
Elsewhere around the Capitol, the calls for justice continue to reverberate. Whether Democrat or Republican, U.S. lawmakers have been quick to condemn the death of African-American George Floyd after being detained by police. 4 officers have now been charged in his death.
It's a long overdue wake-up call to the country that there are too many of these cases where African-American men die in police custody under fairly brutal circumstances.
We have questions before us today that are of constitutional moment. Is our system of justice in America so infected by racism that it cannot function in a manner consistent with our democratic values?
The top Republican in the Senate has also denounced the violence that led to Floyd's death.
In no world whatsoever should arresting a man for an alleged minor infraction involve a police officer putting his knee on a man's neck for 9 minutes while he cries out, "I can't breathe," and then goes silent.
But while Republican leaders have been quick to express condolences and solidarity with the Floyd family, they have been less vocal in criticizing the actions of U.S. President Donald Trump, who this week called in the military to tamp down demonstrations outside the White House. In an opinion piece, one Republican senator, Tom Cotton, expressed support for the president in calling for troops to be deployed on U.S. streets. He told Fox News a show of force is necessary in the wake of protests over Floyd's death, some of which have turned violent.
Let's see how these anarchists respond when the 101st Airborne is on the other side of the street. Congressional
Democrats have sharply criticized Trump's actions and are drafting a package of reforms aimed at changing the culture of policing in the U.S.
And this is just one thing we can do. We can also mandate body cameras. We can also mandate reporting. We can also make sure we change the laws that deal with how we treat these cases.
This as both Democrats and Republicans continue to face pressure to act to restore peace to the streets. Jesusamen Ani, VOA News, Washington.
Now to Africa, where the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says 90 million test kits for COVID-19 have been acquired for use over the next 6 months to boost testing capabilities on the continent as quickly as possible. John Nkengasong, chief of the Africa CDC, says, quote, "We needed to increase our testing very quickly to about 10 to 20 million tests to move ahead of the curve." Nkengasong also noted that 3.4 million tests have been conducted in Africa, but that's only 1,700 tests per 1 million people. A senior South African official says the government is appealing a court ruling that declares some of its coronavirus lockdown regulations invalid. South Africa introduced some of the world's most restrictive COVID-19 lockdowns in March that included a ban on alcohol and cigarettes. But the country has gradually eased some of its restrictions in recent weeks. In West Africa, Senegal's government says it is slightly easing its dawn-to-dusk curfew following unrest over coronavirus restrictions imposed nearly 3 months ago. Africa has almost 162,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, with nearly 4,600 deaths, but close to 70,000 people have recovered from the virus, according to Reuters and the World Health Organization. Sierra Leone is borrowing from lessons learned during the Ebola outbreak to raise awareness on the transmission of coronavirus. The government spokesman on COVID-19, Solomon Jamiru, tells VOA the country has suffered huge economic losses as a result of the pandemic, but it is repurposing every available resource to protect its citizens. I spoke to Mr. Jamiru, who begins with an update on the number of infections, recoveries, and deaths as of late Wednesday.
For cumulative confirmed positive cases, we have 909. We have 47 total number of deaths. The active cases, that is cases in the last 24 hours, based on 153 samples analyzed, is 13. The active cases that are at our isolation centers is 371. And the cumulative recoveries stand at 491.
So are you seeing any spike in the number of infections? And if so, which part of the country?
We have been, unless for the last 72 hours, we have been very much concerned about the western area, which in substantial part had been considered as the hot spot, the epicenter of the disease. For today, for example, we only had 3 in the western area, and yesterday there was none, and 48 hours ago we had 4 in the western area. So in terms of spike, I would say that there has been some fluctuations in the figures, and that is largely due to where you conduct the tests as well.
So how are you responding to those spikes in those areas? What needs to be done?
Because there is evidence of community transmission, there is an emerging thinking that it may not be so helpful if you pay so much attention on identifying and tracing individual cases. With evidence of community transmission, it means it is about time you expanded the scope of your test and start going into communities so you have an idea of how spread this community transmission is.
We've also had reports indicating a lack of equipment for health workers as well as hospitals. How is the government taking care of that concern?
So in terms of the necessary equipment, I would say we would continue to secure what we have to secure within the limited fiscal space from government, and also relying on some of the things that are trickling in from international partners. We continue to prioritize our healthcare workers, our healthcare professionals.
In the past couple of years, Sierra Leone had to deal with the outbreak of Ebola. Any lessons at all learned from that experience that can be useful now during this pandemic?
So yes, we have been able to learn from Ebola, even with respect to risk communication and social mobilization, where I am pretty much involved. We have been able to work closely with the existing structures, those structures that were utilized to address Ebola. We are essentially utilizing those structures. We are going into communities. We are talking with the relevant stakeholders, market women, the youth groups, the religious leaders, the traditional leaders, and this exactly was the structure that was utilized in terms of risk communication and social mobilization.
I imagine Sierra Leone has people who speak different languages or dialects, if you like. How are you able to reach those people that can't speak English and may have a bit of difficulties understanding what is being given out there by the media or the government representatives, so they can understand it in their own language, how to protect themselves from infection from this pandemic?
We have what we call the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists and the Independent Radio Network. It's an established partnership. So we ride on that platform where, for example, we could utilize, they have a scope of about 65 or more radio stations. So for important life-saving messages, we make sure that they are translated into those local dialects. And also when we have our community mobilizers going into the different parts of the country, we make sure that we identify the public influencers in those communities who could speak to their people, who could be listened to.
How are you using the media to get the message across?
We make sure that every day at 11 a.m. we have a press update, and this is covered. We've got an extensive media coverage for this, and we also have some of them who are helping us on social media platforms. We have appointed risk communication officers in the districts, in the 16 districts of Sierra Leone, social mobilization leaders, district spokespersons, and we have ensured that we have media coverage for important facets of the emergency response.
Are you planning to lift the lockdown restrictions soon? I know they were put in place early May. Do you have any plans to lift those restrictions soon?
So once we get to the point where we are sure that if that action is taken, it will not injure us, it will not jeopardize the fight against coronavirus, absolutely, it will always receive the favorable consideration of government.
That was Solomon Jamiru, Sierra Leone government spokesman, discussing his country's efforts on COVID-19. South Africa is poised to gradually open schools this coming week, and feelings are mixed about the event as students between 7th and 12th grade go in first. Is it safe? Is it too soon or overdue? Anita Powell in Johannesburg reports on what doctors, teachers, and educational experts are saying.
This will be a first day of school like no other, as South African students begin to slowly trickle back after more than 9 weeks away under government coronavirus precautions, closing schools. Schools were set to open on June 1st, but Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga said Monday that schools would not be ready before June 8th. But like any other first day, there's excitement and nerves.
I am a bit nervous though, but I'm ready. I'm ready to go back. I would like to go back. I feel the strength of an educator lies mostly in a classroom. I'm ready. I'm ready to go back. Our school has been properly sanitized. All the precautions have been taken.
Arbe teaches 12th grade English at a high school in the northern Limpopo province. Government-funded schools like hers, of which there are about 25,000, are taking a staggered approach, with 7th and 12th graders returning first. According to medical experts, the kids are going to be, medically at least, all right. They're still developing respiratory systems don't give the virus enough to stick to, say experts, and they tend not to be super spreaders.
If children get COVID-19, the disease is usually asymptomatic or mild. So these children don't usually require to go to hospital, but we should also, again, be careful in the very young children who are not schoolgoers, and also those children who have other diseases that may put them at a slightly higher risk for getting COVID-19 and therefore more severe disease.
But education advocates say they don't expect the transition to be smooth.
And it would be a mistake to think that learners and teachers are just going to arrive on the first day of school and it's going to be all systems go in every school. It's going to be inevitable that there are going to be challenges related to learning. You have the possibility that there are outbreaks in specific schools. So to just assume that once schools reopen, it's business as usual would be a mistake.
Ready or not, school is back in session. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.
Some parts of Nairobi have been without running water for weeks after a landslide destroyed a water pipe, making frequent hand washing for coronavirus prevention a challenge. Water distribution points are being set up to help tens of thousands of Kenyans to cope, but the gatherings to collect rationed water risks exposing more people to the virus. Mohammed Yusuf has the details.
Despite government guidelines to stay at home, Maureen Mkala is forced to walk this Nairobi alley in Nairobi's Mathare slum at least 6 times a day since April to get water for her family, including 3 children. She goes to a water collection point where social distancing for COVID-19 prevention is ignored. It takes an hour to get 20 liters of water.
I look for water to clean my hands so that I don't get the virus. We have a water problem. You are forced to go to the crowded water points to get water.
A landslide destroyed a water pipe in April, cutting off running water to entire Nairobi neighborhoods in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. The demand for water for hand washing to prevent the virus has only increased.
There are many people at the water point. We are all converged at one point. We are asked to keep a 1 meter distance to limit the spread of coronavirus. How can we keep that required distance if all of us are fighting to get the little water there is?
In central Kenya, engineers have been fixing the water line to restore running water supplies, which fell by as much as 20%. The Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company says they have already reduced the water loss to 11%, and the line being installed will resolve the shortage.
There won't be any landslides where we are taking the line through. The line realignment is around 3.4 kilometers. We expect by mid-June we will be through with it. Already the road work has been done, 80 kilometers, so all the materials can be able to access the sites easily.
For the people of Mathare and tens of thousands of others forced to collect water during the pandemic, the work cannot be finished soon enough. Mohammed Yusuf for VOA News, Nairobi.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, Tanzania's bongo flavor star Diamond Platnumz drops one for quarantine. We'll be right back after this break.
My people, now you ready to ride? Remix, Mr. Flavor, Valley Dance Hall, and a shower remix. What you gonna continue?
Welcome back to Africa 54. Britain this week eased its lockdown rules with some students returning to school and many families allowed to meet for the first time since March when measures were implemented to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Britain was one of the slowest countries to lock down and is now one of the worst hit with almost 50,000 COVID-19 deaths. Henry Ridgewell reports from London.
As Britain basks in unusually hot weather, many people are embracing the easing of the lockdown, with groups of 6 people from different households allowed to meet outside.
We're getting this virus under control, and this is why we can make the cautious, small, positive steps that we've been able to make today. And if we look at the number of admissions with COVID-19 to hospital at 479, that's down from a peak of 3,121 on the 2nd of April.
Not all scientists agree. Several government advisors warn it's too early to end the lockdown.
We still have a lot of cases here in this country. So the numbers of infections that we have is about 8,000 new infections every day in England alone.
European neighbours like France, Spain and Italy were hard hit early on, but now have far fewer cases. Spain this week recorded its first 24-hour period with no COVID-19 deaths since March, with just 71 new infections. The British government says the route out of the crisis is its new track and trace system, quickly diagnosing cases, then tracing and quarantining those exposed to infection. Tens of thousands of people have been recruited to operate the system.
We can't be sure that that's working effectively yet, and yet we're going ahead and making these changes, anyway. And so I think that is rather dangerous.
Visiting a newly reopened London market this week, Britain's Chancellor dismissed those fears.
We do it in a safe and responsible way, and that's why today we're starting with covered markets and car showrooms. In a couple of weeks we'll get the shops open, and then hopefully at the beginning of July we'll be able to get many more restaurants and pubs open as well.
Back at the beach, business owners are in dilemma.
I'm fully convinced there'll be a second wave with the way that it's all been dealt with, but some businesses will have to reopen or they might go bankrupt.
Group you're in?
Bit by bit, Britain is trying to return to normality. A second wave of infections remains the biggest fear, but the government insists it is in control. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
After an initial cancellation due to weather conditions, NASA and SpaceX achieved an historic launch, sending American astronauts into orbit for the first time in 9 years from U.S. soil. Many moving parts behind the scenes ensured the launch's success. VOA's Arash Arbasadi spoke with two teams keeping travelers safe this week in space.
Yeah, so this is the flag that we left here almost 9 years ago.
This week, aboard the International Space Station, astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, left and center, claimed victory in NASA's cosmic version of the game Capture the Flag. The two reclaimed the item left behind by the last crew launch from the United States nearly a decade ago. The launch Saturday aboard this SpaceX rocket came after weather conditions scrubbed their original attempt days earlier. But weather is just one safety concern.
We've been trying to figure out how to do this safely for over 5 years, and putting it together finally. And I say putting it together because we didn't actually execute anything.
Lieutenant Colonel Michael Thompson oversees pararescue teams like the ones that monitored Saturday's launch. Think of them as emergency medical workers jumping out of planes and helicopters to save lives. Thompson says not hearing much about them is a good thing.
Hopefully you'll never see us in action, and we're proud of that. We're happy to sit back and just do our job and be ready.
Before liftoff, experts evaluate the weather conditions in and above the clouds.
So the most important thing that launch weather officers do in our office is basically to ensure that every vehicle, whether it's crewed or uncrewed, makes it to orbit safely.
Launch Weather Officer Mark Berger works with a team that assesses safety risks from the smallest to the most severe.
Unfortunately, lightning and a spacecraft don't go well together. You've got a vehicle that is speeding up through the atmosphere, and if there's an electrical field, it can actually induce a lightning strike.
Separately, SpaceX on Wednesday launched into orbit 60 Starlink satellites. The hardware will become part of a global broadband internet service beamed down from space. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
So that we can reunite these two together.
In our entertainment report, Bongo Flava superstar Diamond Platnumz' new song Quarantine invites a little fun into stay-home orders and curfews. It has reached over 5 million views on YouTube in just 2 weeks. Now it's time to catch up on what's happening in African music with Heather Maxwell, host of VOA's Music Time in Africa radio program. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Esther. There is a lot of trouble in the world right now with the coronavirus and now the recent death of George Floyd in the United States. But still, life marches on. People have babies, we have birthdays, we fall in love, and so we still really, really need to celebrate those moments and to just have fun when we're feeling cooped up and anxious and maybe alone. One way to do that is to dance. And on May 22nd, Wasafi Records, based out of Tanzania and founded and led by the superstar Diamond Platnumz, came out with a brand new, awesome music video and song. It's called Quarantine. Now, the video features 5 of Wasafi artists and also including, of course, Diamond Platnumz himself. And they are all having so much fun showing off their own quarantine dance moves. Woo! Now that was fun. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Heather, for the wonderful music. Be sure to join Heather Maxwell again next Friday for another exciting entertainment report right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.